Hello and welcome to the Growing Pains podcast, where I'm delighted to be joined by Rob Gardner, who is the co-founder and CEO of Rebalance Earth. Rob, a very warm welcome to the podcast. How do we find you on this very sunny day?
Hey, Harry. Great to be on your podcast. No, I'm well. It's not too hot, not too cold. Perfect.
Yeah, not for long. It'll be one or the other
No.
soon enough.
Yeah.
If you are happy to just kick us off, I think it'd be great for everybody to get a bit of context on your background. Obviously, Rebalance Earth is where we are today, and we'll cover the growth of that later on in the podcast. But hearing a bit more about you and your story, I think would be a really nice start.
Yeah. So I'm CEO and co-founder of Rebalance Earth, and we are a fund manager that invests in delivering resilience at a landscape level in the UK. So we want to invest in an entire area, typically at a river catchment level. And if we can restore nature, then we can actually reduce the flood risk and the drought risk and some of the climate change risk that we're experiencing right now to everything that impacts our energy systems, our food, our homes, our roads and water utilities. And that's a pretty cool space to be in. And it combines my two passions, really, which is sort of finance and geography. I'll kind of start with the geography bit. My parents were both teachers and taught in international schools all over the world. So I was born in Holland and lived in Argentina. And by the time I was sort of 15, I'd visited over 30 different countries. And so one of that is I've always had a passion for geography, really how, the human environment interfaces with the physical environment. And going to university and studying geography, it was always considered a bit of a second class degree, but I always thought it was the best because I love seeing how things connect and interrelate. And geography as a discipline is really about understanding how that happens across space. You could argue history is about how those connections happen across time. Geography is a very sort of spatial way of looking at the world. But at the same time, we've lived all over the world. My parents were teachers and we didn't have much money. And so I was drawn to the city lights and got myself a really good and well-paid job working at Deutsche Bank as part of the graduate program. And I worked in foreign exchange to begin with. Again, part of my growing up in Argentina meant that I think at the age of 7, I knew the exchange rate of every South American currency to the US dollar, because that was the sort of preeminent currency. Everything was sort of devaluing against it. And actually, I used to work in a bureau de change pre the euro, where people would come in with their lira, their pesetas, and I'd change it all into French francs, and then end up with a safe full of pesetas and lira and pounds and dollars, and then change it all back to French francs, and then do it again 2 or 3 times a day. And I just had a passion for the FX markets. And then after that, I transitioned actually into advising pension funds on their long-term liabilities. And that's been fair to say that the bulk of my professional career has been about thinking about long-term investments and the role pension funds play in both not just securing our future well-being, our future income, but actually the transformational role that private capital can play in funding infrastructure and roads. And actually, that's where it kind of comes back to Rebalance Earth, because part of the framing is saying, well, actually, nature is critical infrastructure. And how can we use this long-term patient pension fund money that we use to build our roads and our railways and our ports to rebuild, to restore nature? And how do we use the language of infrastructure to get paid for nature? And 20 years ago, much to my parents' surprise, I quit my job at Merrill Lynch, which was a very well-paid job, and decided to found my first business with my first business partner, a guy called Dawid Kanotiahulu. And we founded a company called Reddington, and over 20 years built that into a very successful UK pension consultancy, advising some of the largest pension funds in the UK, and took that to initially sort of partial sale to private equity, and then the private equity firm sold it to Gallagher, a big global insurer, a year ago. So kind of taking a business from nothing through various stages over 20 years. And then on that journey, I founded another business called Mallow Street, which is still going today. That's for the pension fund industry. But like any business, that's pivoted and has developed a new product called Sophie, which is using the power of AI to enable financial advisors to give better advice to their clients, to follow up in the right way, to stay compliant, to save them time. And then I joined the executive board of St. James's Place for 4 years, where I was brought in to sort of turn around their investment proposition and build a better offering. And then 3.5 years ago, quit to found Rebalance Earth. So yeah, hopefully a sense of how my kind of passion for geography growing up, 25, 26 years working in finance, banking, pensions, wealth management has kind of brought me to Rebalance Earth, which is the fusion of those two skill sets.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess the other one to draw out is the entrepreneurialism. What is it that draws you back to that as sort of being a founder to growing something? Because it's obviously, it requires a lot from you.
Yeah, it does. One thing that people don't realize in, let's call it 25 years, I've gone 5 years where I've not earned any money. So that's a delayed gratification, or putting yourself in a position where you don't pay yourself because you're basically building your business with sweat equity. When I tell people, oh yeah, so 5 of my 25 years, I've not earned a penny. It's hard to do. It's a lot harder to do when you have kids. What do I love about it? I love two things: the building, the figuring out. It has that sense of when you were younger, building Lego and like not following the instruction manual, but like I remember as a kid, I thought I could build like a perpetual motion machine where I could just build a car that would go on and on. So it has that at the beginning, it has that bit. Then it has the phase which I like, which is the flywheel phase, which is when you get into it and you go like, how do I get the flywheel's turning, but how do I get it turning faster and faster? What are the points of weakness? What are the points of leverage? And how do I do that? I think there's also something about being, master of your own destiny. And then I think the other piece is all of those businesses have always been very purpose driven. Reddington and Mallow Street were both B Corps. The work that Rebalance Earth does is extremely impactful, and therefore it's also the difference you can make as an entrepreneur, which is much harder to do when you're an employee in a large company with multiple stakeholders. Well, that's just a lot harder. But it's taken me a while to realize that latter thing was important to me.
Yeah, because obviously that's part of it is finding the balance for you. And I think we've talked previously about the importance of discipline, because you mentioned there the purpose element, but obviously that then draws a lot of you into it. If you've got everything from your passion for geography running through that, then it means a lot to you. You give a lot to it. You mentioned kids and a lot going on in the background. What is the importance of discipline to maintain boundaries as much as anything, but also ensure that it doesn't just spill over and you are giving of your best, but also taking time for yourself?
Yeah, and maybe discipline sounds too disciplinarian. I think let's call it consistency. One of my favorite quotes is, the ordinary things consistently done creates extraordinary results. And I think back to my comment about the flywheel, I think one of the things I learned in Reddington is that sometimes in the early years, we were sort of busy fools chasing different opportunities, maybe chasing what felt like the quicker win, rather than like actually figuring out what we're doing well, what we're good at, what our critical success factors are, and doubling down and just doing that with consistency every quarter, every year, over a few years, and actually just the impact that can have. But then I think that sort of consistency plays through into every part of life. I suppose as I've got older, one of the weaknesses that I have to address is my health, my vitality. And I now need to be much more consistent about what I eat, about how I exercise, about thinking about my sleep in a way that, 20 years ago, I just never thought about that. Right. And again, I'm not trying to be the world's fittest man or anything, but it's in the context of being an entrepreneur, being a parent, and being consistent, and which for me means I need to plan a bit more about what I eat. If I go out, I need to maybe look at the menu the night before and pick thoughtfully about what I'm going to eat, rather than when I get there and eat what I fancy. But actually, again, these things can make quite a big difference to your health. And then in your home life as well, it's the sort of consistency, for us as a family, it's the consistency of being home on a weekly basis. So try and remain disciplined on how many nights away I am from home and keeping that to a minimum, understanding therefore that when I am away, I want to make sure it's a really high impact work event. It's not just a nice to have. And then the flip side is also the consistency of being there for the kids stuff that matters. Yeah, it might be sports day, it might be a school play, it might be a prize giving. So that it cuts across all dimensions of life.
And you've got your own work-life balance, obviously, to factor in. It's one of those things that means slightly different things to different people. How do you find balancing that out across your business? Because it will mean a different thing to, say, your team, to you, and sort of identifying when it might be slightly out of kilter and how you manage and deal with that.
I think one is being really clear that a startup requires a different energy and pace than being in another company. And I think one of the things I learned now, and again, only with hindsight on Reddington, is in the beginning there was a bit of an all-in culture, and as we grew, I suppose over time you trend to look more like a larger company where there's a different mindset. Startups, because they're normally either disrupting an existing business model or coming up with a new one, require huge amounts of energy and passion. That's what you need to escape the status quo orbit that is holding it back, right? So certainly with Rebalance Earth, I've been a lot clearer about what the expectations are. And it does mean that sometimes we need to work long hours or late on the weekends. But what I don't want is a sense that that happens all the time. B, that when it does happen, that people can take time off. So not a FaceTime culture. When I worked in banking, I think there's quite a lot of FaceTime culture where quite often we're working long hours and late. But it was as much just to show that you were, rather than because there was a piece of work that you needed to get over the line. Versus at the other end, which is my job is 9 to 5, it's 5, I go home and the work's not done. And so it's finding that judgment of knowing when to go, okay, we just have to get this piece of work over the line. It's really important. And for me, and certainly for my colleagues who are my age, I think the thing that you can give as a startup is sort of flexibility. And so what I value, and I know certainly that my peers in my situation, is the ability to be dynamic around pick up and drop off and school plays. But as a firm, we don't have a policy about face to face and working together, but it naturally happens that people do come into the office and there's an energy and a buzz. But at the same time, people work from home or work from wherever. And so that the flexibility matters rather than how much you're in and out. And then for me personally, what I value is holidays. So I really now like to just go on holiday and not check my email, not like go off. That's really important to me. And that's because it's important to me personally, but it's also important for my family time. I kind of treat our holidays as our highest family time. And actually what I've realized is that when I do that, I come back and I've suddenly get a breakthrough or a brainwave or something rather than if I was checking my email every day. And I think it's understanding that rest is an important part of working hard. So landing that with the team, which is when people have worked hard, and if there's a bit of a fallow period, be like, hey, sure, yeah, take time off to recover and and recharge. And therefore that's what's important for me for work-life balance. I think for other people, I try and get them to think about what it means for them. But I think, if you're a graduate at the beginning of your career, there's a huge opportunity to work hard and learn a lot, right? I mean, that was my reflection of the early days of working at Deutsche Bank and in banking is I got to learn so much. And because I didn't have the responsibility of family or kids, actually that was a time to sort of go all in on that.
And holiday is obviously one of those things that if you don't do it in that way and you don't fully switch off, it actually probably doesn't have the value that it might. So there's valuable insight for other people around how you get to that point with your team and the expectations and the communication around it, of being able to say, I'm away for this period of time, I need to switch off, making sure that people are there to pick up the slack.
Yeah, I mean, that came from, I'm guessing, lessons learned on the early days of Reddington, which is that old adage, you know, if you're the CEO, are you working in the business or on the business. And if you're working in the business, then typically the way you know that is, can you go on holiday and the business runs without you for 2 weeks? It started from that insight. It's the classic functionality. Have you got the right people in the right roles doing the right things? And if you set that right as a CEO, you should be able to go 2 weeks without anyone having to call you or speak to you, or only if it's of the highest priority. But you definitely don't need to be checking emails every day. It also forces you to trust and delegate to your team, which is also important. I think it's also then just good for yourself because it takes a while to shut down. And like, I think on holiday, it always takes 2 or 3 days just to sort of decompress and come out of it. And I don't think you get to that sort of restorative benefit of going on holiday unless you do that, because every time you check your email or whatever, it immediately pulls you back in. And then now the third thing, since having a family, it's it's the thing that I value the most. It's the thing I enjoy the most, and obviously then work is a distraction from that.
Yeah, and as you say, it's a simple concept, but it is that thing that so many people struggle with about putting it in place so that the business runs without you. And that is the acid test for how much your team is stepping up, but also how much you're letting them step into those roles. That if you don't, you find actually all of those things still sit with you. And after your 2 days of relaxing into your holiday, suddenly you're back into it and it doesn't really count for anything. And you come back probably more stressed than you were before.
It's another. It's a. I mean, I think I've got passions for financial education and teaching people about money. But also, if you plan your holidays in advance and book them about a year in advance, they're normally a lot cheaper than if you wait. I was making this point to my co-founder, who always book, and then was complaining about like how his flight to Thailand cost so much. And I said, okay, this year, book your holiday to Thailand in January, and I bet you'll be like 25 to 30% cheaper. He was like, you're right. But then it forces you to like plan ahead, book it in, lock it off, rather than, you know, oh, I'll book it in November. I think it also links to the point that some people leave it last minute. It's back to that, am I busy doing it versus taking time away and going, actually, no, going on holiday is important. And if it's important for you, go ahead and book it now. And actually, if everyone books it in advance, you avoid that bit at the end where everyone all suddenly in the last minute all suddenly books holiday at the same time as well, which is another reason for doing it.
Yeah, and as a sort of bigger picture, the fact that you are open to that, talking to people about that, obviously shows that look, this isn't the sort of place where you can't take a holiday, you can't sort of get out. And actually, the more upfront everybody is, the better the atmosphere and culture around it is.
I think this lays something that we talked about before, but it's also, one of our company values is have fun, and it's building that into our team building, and it's this understanding that actually by having fun together as a team, we build more trust. Actually, by having fun together, it's part of that recuperative, restorative, recharging of the sort of the battery individually and collectively, and it just makes it fun. So even as a business, it's within our self-interest. And the feedback from one of our quarterly away days was, if it is important, can we have put some budget behind it and put some resource, and so we have done that. And then it allows people to be creative about what having fun means for us as a company, and scheduling that time and making it happen and treating it as a priority, not as the thing that sort of gets cancelled.
And you talked about the growth mindset that you want people to have, taking it from sort of 2x to 10x in terms of the mentality. How do you then balance that to make sure that you've got fun, and they sort of coexist alongside each other?
Well, actually, I think that having the 10x mentality frees you up actually to give you more time to have more fun. I mean, I think the whole 10x mentality is that it versus the 2x is that if you said to someone, who maybe makes money by selling their time for money, a lawyer, they can go, okay, great, I can do 1,000 hours a year. Okay, I can do 2,000 hours a year, but they can't do 4,000 hours a year. So there's a sort of a limit to sort of how much you can do. And so like a 2x mindset normally boils down to, well, I just work longer and harder. A 10x mindset forces you to sort of stop and think and go, well, what is the value that our business delivers or that we do? What is our flywheel? What are the compounding things? What are our processes or frameworks or data that can do it? Because it forces you to accept you can't just work harder and longer hours. Which, in order to do that, you need to be more creative. And to think to be more creative, you probably need to create some time to have more fun, right? I mean, Lego talk about serious play. We know about, you know, the studies that show that sort of play and creativity go together. And so actually, I think the two go hand in hand. The 10x mindset, and if you can start to embed that, frees up the time to have the fun, and having the fun creates the creativity to step outside of the 2x mindset and get into the 10x mindset. So that's how I try and make them compatible.
Yeah, and it moves us into an area, obviously, of particular interest for me. But you, when it comes to people, are also a big advocate of coaching, and not just for you, but also for the wider team. What is it about that that you find is so important and impactful for the team?
I think it links exactly to that 2x versus 10x mindset. Because if I think about one of the biggest limiting factors in our business or any business, or even when I think about the UK and is mindset, is attitude. And, I'd like to think I'm relatively high on these things, but you get trapped in your own paradox, in your own mindset, and you need someone external to you to sort of challenge your thinking so that you can sort of see past that paradox or that mindset that sort of traps you where you are. And for that to be effective, it needs to be someone who I think has the skills and tools to kind of do that and needs to be trusted by that individual. But, I've always believed in coaching for myself, coaching for the company. I've been a long time member of an organization called YPO, which, is for entrepreneurs and actually uses this kind of concept of group coaching through this concept of called Johari's window. And actually, in the world of AI, I've doubled down on it even more because, you know, we live in a world where intelligence is just on tap. When I worked in banking, you needed an army of graduates to build Excel models that might take a week, 2 weeks to build out. And you can do that in half an hour with Claude now. But what you can't replicate is people going to a conference or an event, joining dots, thinking about it, judgment when someone has built those models. Again, if you worked in a bank, you'd have an army of graduates and associates who might build these models, but it was the senior people who'd done the deals who could look at the model that you've been building for 2 weeks and be like, that doesn't make any sense. Or what about that? That's judgment. And so I think the value of judgment goes up even more. And therefore, you know, I think coaching is just an excellent way to get that maximum amount of judgment, creativity, human intelligence to perform well. And I think also, the cultural, the hardest thing is when you've got a team and putting together a team is, people always talk about how diversity, cognitive diversity is important, and that makes sense. But the bit that I think people don't talk about enough is that trying to lead and manage cognitive diversity is hard because, one of the things that we know is that, dictatorships are very good at making decisions. Democracy is good at avoiding, you don't want full dictator decision making, but if you have a democratic process, you never make a decision. If I paint those two extremes. And so how do you strike the balance between decision making with effective challenge and input and avoiding blind spots, but also just having too many differing opinions that you can't ever create a unifying position, and therefore no one ever makes a decision. Or even worse, you make the least worst decision rather than the or the decision that everyone can buy into, even though it's not very good. So that's something I really struggle with, and I think that's where coaching at an individual level, but also as a team level, can be very powerful.
And how have you found the impact of that in terms of the person who's leading the team?
I mean, yeah, humans are humans. They're not computers or AI, right? So I sometimes you feel like you've got it working and it's working great, and then it falls off track, and you're like, okay, how do I get it back on track? And I think alignment is hard and takes time, and alignment requires understanding where people come from, their sort of not just their backgrounds, but their sort of behavioral ways of processing, and then sort of creating the culture to enable that. And that's quite a complicated system. And as I say, it's not the easiest to get right. I think it's just something you try and always strive to make better. And yeah, sometimes it feels like it's really working and humming, and then suddenly something happens and you fall off, or you hire a new person, and it disrupts the, not that the new person has been the cause of the disruption, but just introducing something new disrupts it, and then you have to not quite start again. But yeah, it's a never ending process.
Yeah, that could be a sort of mantra for the plight of the entrepreneur, a never-ending process. But speaking of the current process you're in at the moment, let's just finish off, if you would, with a bit about the next 6 to 12 months for Rebalance Earth and your ambitions for the business.
Yeah, look, sadly, as we look out on the world, climate change and nature risk is here and is going to impact the UK and around the world in a way that, for people who know about this stuff, it's like, yeah, we knew this was going to happen. I think for a lot of people, they've sort of been sort of blissfully unaware. We're recording this the week after a massive heat wave in the UK. But what people forget was that literally this same time, week one of Wimbledon in 2025 was also a heat wave. January and February of this year was extreme rainfall causing flooding. These are things that are locked in now for the next 10, 15, 20 years, which were different from 25 years ago. And they have a direct impact on people's lives, homes being flooded, farmers, drought, our economy. And we think one way of solving that is by restoring nature at scale. Nature is really good at helping us adapt and have resilience to the downstream consequences of climate change. And in order to do that, we need to finance at speed and at scale a lot of nature restoration. And if you do that, you can actually deliver a lot of resilience to our energy systems, our food, our health, our homes, our roads, our water utilities. And that's pretty exciting. And that's what Rebalance Earth does. We deliver resilience at a place-based level at scale by raising money from pension funds and deploying them into large landscape recovery projects. So that means our total focus is on raising large amounts of capital from pension funds who want to back this idea and make it happen, and then deploying that into these projects where we can turn around and show, hey, by the way, if we get 50 farmers to change the way they farm the land, that can be far more impactful and far quicker than planting 1,000 trees. We should still plant 1,000 trees, but like impact and scale, and it delivers all of these amazing benefits. And that becomes our flywheel. And if we get that flywheel right over the next 12 months, we suddenly go from 10,000 hectares to 100,000 hectares to 1 million hectares to 5 million hectares. And if we do that, I think you make the UK the most climate and nature resilient country in the world. But not only that, we've sort of pioneered a way of thinking about how you finance this stuff. In the same way that, 200 years ago, we pioneered insurance, and we've been at the forefront of banking. So that's exciting, and I'd love Rebalance Earth to be a driving force in that. At the same time, globally, we've just got AI, and AI just gets bigger and faster and better, with all of the risks that also go with that. And what I've realized is that we don't need as many people than I thought we needed 2 years ago. And so we have this mantra of a team of 20 doing the work of 40 and the impact of 80. And so for me, it's really about how do we leverage these tools to be the most productive that we can have. And that goes back to being really disciplined about understanding what our flywheel is and going, well, we need to deploy our capital where it can have the highest value. And as an organization now, the resources that we have as a firm are people, it's money and time, but it's also intelligence on tap. People call it tokens, but and I think this is a new way of operating that I was just not. It wasn't even in my mindset 2 years ago to think. You think about team size and seniority and org charts. Of course, you think about your IT budget, but that was about laptops and all the rest. And that's exciting because I think if we get that right, we can really tap into that 10x mindset we talked about.
All that planning and strategy, and then AI comes and completely dominates, and you have to completely pivot and redo the whole thing. But I guess that's part and parcel of it, isn't it? Best laid plans and all that, but you have to be adaptable and flexible in order to make the most of something like AI coming along. And that suddenly is a big focus for entrepreneurs, is making sure that you do maximize on the potential of it.
Yeah, I think, and on the potential, but also on the risk. So, we are an FCA registered fund manager. Rightly, in financial services, the FCA probably has, higher thresholds of data security and everything else. And so it's the sort of how do we tap into as much sort of productivity as possible, but at the same time having this very clear guardrail about data and cybersecurity and also being really clear about our process, about spending more time up front on prompting and thinking about it, and then spending more time at the end of sort of reviewing it and not sort of falling into the trap of lazy AI, which is easy to fall into the trap.
And the outlook for the next 12 months?
In 12 months time, I'd love to raise, 150 million into our funds, potentially with access to a further 200 million, have deployed money into these sort of landscape recovery projects that are emerging in the UK and created a blueprint. We're developing a methodology called resilience purchase agreements, which allows companies, water utilities, energy, etc., to contract and pay for flood mitigation and pay for drought. We're also developing this concept called like a water resilience unit, which allows a catchment to define water resilience in an area, and again, allow the people who might benefit from that to pay with that. And then in 12 months' time, I think we've then created a scalable model, which is this is how you can go and raise lots of money from pension funds. This is how you identify an investable catchment at scale. This is how we can contract so that the companies who benefit pay for it. And then hopefully it's a case of, yeah, going from 100,000 hectares to 1 million hectares and beyond.
Yeah, well, I think we can see how it starts to take shape. A very exciting period of time for you guys coming up. But a massive thank you for your time today, Rob. It's been great to chat, and lots in there for founders, entrepreneurs, but also I think people who are interested also in that sustainability space and the importance and need for it. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Harry. And I've enjoyed all of our pre-calls. I feel like I've been getting some free coaching in just preparing for this. So thank you.
Absolute pleasure. Cheers, Rob.
All right.